earned the respect of some of even his fiercest critics during his tenure. But there's also a dispute over exactly what legacy he leaves. To discuss, we're joined by Research and Advocacy Officer at Judges Matter, Zikhona Ndlebe. We're also joined by legal analyst and public commentator, Advocate Modidima Mannya. Thank you for being with us. Let me start with you, Ms. Ndlebe. Very broadly, how do you believe that Mogoeng Mogoeng will be remembered?
I'm certain that most people will remember him as a Chief Justice who was appointed to the position with only 2 years in the Constitutional Court. He's left quite a broad legacy. It's not all negative, it's not all positive. We have to be honest about that. He has actually tried to run the office of the Chief Justice and ensure that it is effective as much as possible. And one of the most important legacies that he will leave is the norms and standards, because before he was the Chief Justice, there were no norms and standards. They only came about in 2014, in February 2014. And that was all thanks to Chief Justice Mogoeng. But last year, a lot happened, and one of the things that we will remember about him from last year are the complaints that were lodged against him by various bodies. The one complaint related to the comments that he made in a webinar in June 2020 relating to Israel and Palestine and South Africa and its views. And the second complaint that was against Chief Justice Mogoeng relates to the vaccine and the comments that he made in a speech that he was giving. So that's why I'm saying that it's not all good, it's not all bad, but he will definitely be remembered for the good things that he's done, and there's still pending complaints against him currently.
Yeah, and we'll talk about some of those. But firstly, just broadly, Advocate Mannya, do you agree it's a mixed legacy?
Yes, good afternoon to your viewers. Yes, it's a mixed legacy, and in some instances quite damaging to him as a retired Chief Justice. You must expect that beyond his tenure tomorrow, he would still be available to be used in many capacities in the country. But I think that some of the things that he has done have gone to some bit of extreme. And as my colleague says, there are some major improvements that he brought to the judiciary, and that must be acknowledged. And I think one of the things, other than the norms and standards, is his insistence on the issue of reserved judgments. He has been very firm on that, and I think that contributes significantly to dispensing justice. So there is a mixed bag here, good, bad, and the ugly, I suppose.
Yeah, and we'll focus, as I said, his Christianity was a big issue when he was first being interviewed, and we'll look at the statements that you've both raised that he's made. But Advocate, is it fair enough to say that there has been no suggestion that he has not been fair to all groupings in South Africa, not outside the court, but in the court, in judgments, and has respected the constitutional rights of members of the LGBTQI community, for example?
Yes, look, I think the one major concern that people had was his moral conservatism and his religious fundamentalism, because as you know, he's quite conservative, and people would have had serious fears about the possibility of him being homophobic. But you must also understand that in the context of the court, the Constitutional Court in particular, it's not just his weight, but it's the weight of about 10 judges there. So it does not follow that he would have his way around. But what must be given to him is the fact that even with those characteristics, he has not necessarily exhibited, at least in the judgments that he delivered or was part of, any sense that he was biased towards any category of society. And I think that is commendable, having regard to his personal views about a number of matters.
Ms. Ndlebe, do you agree? He explained in the beginning that the New Testament talks about obeying laws, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, basically, which was his way of saying, despite his conservative and religious views, he would uphold the Constitution. Were there enough test cases for that? And can we say he's always been fair in the courts?
I think we can definitely say, as my colleague has said, that he's applied the law that was before him. He's applied the Constitution while he was sitting as a judge, and yes, he's never hidden his religious beliefs, and he's been open about it. Especially last year, he's always been open about his religious beliefs. But as my colleague has said, it's not only him who sits in court when judgments have to be made or when cases must be heard. It's him along with other judges, other constitutional court judges. And in that instance, we cannot say that there's been any form of bias in decisions that have been made by the Constitutional Court, because decisions are not made only by one judge, for example, Chief Justice Mogoeng, but they are made by the Constitutional Court as a whole.
Let's talk about one of the most surprising elements to many people watching his tenure, Advocate, the way he treated former President Jacob Zuma. When his name was put forward by Zuma, all these concerns were raised that he would be pro the former president, he would be biased towards Zuma. Though that and his Christianity were the big issues, then the Nkandla judgment came along and everybody said, sure, look how fiercely independent he is.
Well, I think the people who held that view have got some bit of low-level sense of thinking. Judges have got certain responsibilities and there are checks and balances. So the suggestion that because he was picked up by former President Zuma and he was going to do the bidding for him was a false start of thinking. He had a responsibility to write a well-reasoned judgment, failing which his colleagues would have taken him head on that one. So there was never an issue around whether he was going to do anybody's bidding. The fact that he was the one nominated by President Zuma must not make him President Zuma. He is Judge Mogoeng Mogoeng. So I don't think that anything turned on the fact that he was nominated by President Zuma. I think much turned on whether he would apply the law correctly, and in many instances he did.
Yeah, and I guess the same sort of issues are going to come up with anybody who is put forward by the current president, although he's trying to look at it more broadly. Do you agree, Advocate?
Certainly. I mean, there's already a lot of contestations in the space. As you know, for instance, the public protector is nominated. We know that she's been having sparring issues with the president. Judge President Chopper has been nominated. We know there are issues. If the president were to decide to appoint any or nominate any of the two, there will be major actions. The question of the current Deputy Chief Justice is contested in the public. People are attacking him. If the president nominates him, there's going to be, if the president were to nominate me, there's going to be elections in any event. So anybody who is nominated as Chief Justice is going into a contested space.
All right, Ms. Ndlebe, let's look at some of the controversies. So you raised this, the Judicial Conduct Committee earlier this year ordered him to retract statements he made on Israel, and those were in 2020. And during that webinar, he said that as a Christian, he was obliged to love and pray for Israel. So the case is still being finalized, but do you think he pushed the line there?
We as Judges Matter have always said that judges should speak through their judgments. And if judges are invited to attend extramural activities, then those activities should be in line with their office. So with regards to what happened in 2020, the webinar had nothing to do with Chief Justice Mogoeng's office, although he was invited as the Chief Justice. So we do believe that he acted out of his office, out of what he should have done as a Chief Justice. He expressed his personal views in a public platform, but as he was invited as a Chief Justice. And as you said, that he was ordered to retract those statements and apologize, but he has refused to do that. And he's still contesting that. He has actually lodged an appeal against the decision that was made by the JSC. So as Judges Matter, we do believe that he did cross a bit of a line there, because the webinar that he attended was, he was invited as a Chief Justice, and he expressed his personal views, and those views had nothing to do with his office, which he's currently in.
Advocate, what do you think? As an advocate, also often have to watch what they say. I mean, he said he was speaking in his personal capacity, although it was the day before South Africa was raising a debate in the UN that was in support of the human rights of the Palestinian people, saying he feels obliged to love and pray for Israel. However, does that undermine the human rights of the people of Palestine? I think it's going to be an interesting case.
Well, I think he missed the point completely. I don't know whether he wants to tell us that when he's sleeping, he's no longer the Chief Justice of the Republic. I think that was a very, very low blow by Justice Mogoeng. What I think for me aggravates the matter is that when he's called out, he exhibited what I unfortunately have to use this word, extreme arrogance. And I think that is going to go down in history as a Chief Justice who's never respected his office. As my colleague correctly points out, he was invited in his capacity as a Chief Justice, and he actually spoke, and in the minds of the public, he spoke as a Chief Justice. His personal views, and he knows, and his oath of office is very specific, that his personal views don't matter when he performs the duties of public office. You will recall that it was Chief Justice Mogoeng who penned a judgment criticizing, and he even said that outside court, criticizing the moral and ethical conduct of our leaders. And he's part of one of the three leaders of the one arm of state, and you would have expected him to live up to what he actually preaches. So I think that was very unfortunate, and it's what represents part of the ugly part. The same with the vaccine story, that he didn't actually even have to comment, and he uses his position to make such irresponsible statement. And I call that irresponsible because that has now contributed to the resistance to vaccination, which has now held the country to ransom. We need more South Africans to be vaccinated to move forward. And if people listen to a Chief Justice who doesn't have a clue about science talking about a devil in a vaccine, people will believe it. And I think that was very irresponsible of anybody holding that position to make such statements.
Yeah, he raised it in a prayer, but like you say, the scientists were saying this is impossible. There's no mark of the beast here, sort of adding to that concern. I'd like to speak to you, Advocate, very quickly. His behaviour at the Judicial Service Commission interviews have also left some shocked, quite frankly. The EFF leader, Julius Malema, was giving Judge Daya Pillay a grilling about her relationship with Pravin Gordhan. Then he said, yes, Gordhan started asking me at some point about Daya Pillay, but he was complaining about the minister's behaviour. Pillay was being interviewed. She couldn't respond to what happened behind closed doors. Do you agree it made things very, very complicated?
Well, I think as my colleague said that in the last year or so, Chief Justice Mogoeng has really discredited himself in many ways. I mean, the issue of Minister Gordhan, even if it was a valid concern, it ought to have been raised at the correct platform. I mean, to have confronted a candidate who was not even probably familiar with what was discussed in the context at an interview, it just rendered, and I think you'll recall that this whole process has now been sort of set aside and it has to be started. And it is unfortunate that that was his last stint to preside over the appointment of judges, and it goes down as a blot against him. I think it was so unfortunate that he got himself to that level. But it represents what my colleague has said has been a deterioration in the past year or two of his behavior.
Ms. Ndlebe, do you agree? I mean, Judge Daya Pillay is actually pulled out of the race, even though the whole interview process has been restarted. Is some of that on the shoulders of the outgoing Chief Justice?
That's how it's called.
Ms. Ndlebe, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay. Did you hear the question, or should I repeat it?
No, your sound was totally gone.
All right.
Question.
All right. Sorry about that. So I said Judge Daya Pillay is actually pulled out of the whole race. Is some of that on the shoulders of the outgoing Chief Justice?
I'd say definitely some of it's on his shoulders because he chaired the JSC, and as the chair, he had the responsibility to ensure that the interviews are conducted in a fair manner, and that the commissioners also exercised some form of restraint when questioning candidates, despite their personal views about candidates. And Chief Justice Mogoeng did not chair the JSC in the last April sitting when he was chair. In a fair manner, he did not perform his role as the chairperson appropriately. So Judge Diapile did not avail herself for the rerun of the interviews, which happened last week. It was not to be unexpected, because the way in which she was treated in the April interviews, it was totally uncalled for. And Chief Justice Mogoeng actually contributed to that treatment, to that unfair treatment, and he should not have done that, because he was the chair and he's the head of the judiciary and the chair of the JSC.
All right, so I think both of you are in agreement. Like you said at the beginning, his legacy not all bad, but not all good either. And maybe things have changed recently with a series of controversies. Thank you very much. Looking back at the legacy of the outgoing Chief Justice, the retiring Chief Justice Mogoeng Mogoeng, that was Research and Advocacy Officer, Judges Matter, Zikhona Ndlebe, also legal analyst and commentator, Advocate Modidima Mannya.